Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Civic Engagement. Tonight, we'll bring you the long line of guests as we've been talking about the whole month. I bring to you a special guest, Alameda County District Attorney candidate Terry Wiley. Terry Wiley, welcome to the Civic Engagement.
Glad to be here, brother. Glad to be here.
So, Terry, I've known you for a long time, and you have been a DA for a long time. How long have you been a DA?
30 years. I started in, well, it's actually going on 31, but I started in 1990. And so I've been in the district attorney's office for 30 years.
Man, that is a long time. So, what makes you decide to run for the top position?
Well, you know, in part that I've been in criminal justice for 30 years, and I am the natural person to assume the leadership of the district attorney's office, not simply because I've been there for 30 years, but more so because of what I've stood for 30 years. And I am the person who is going to be best equipped to bring the kind of change that the community is looking for.
Okay, that's a good segue. So, when is the district attorney election?
The election is going to be June 2022.
Okay, so
a year from now.
A year from now, the Alameda County District Attorney Office is going to have a new DA in charge.
Absolutely. Well, the primary is June 2022. And if I get over 50% of the vote, then I will be the new district attorney. If not, we would then have a runoff election in November.
Okay. So in June 2022, Terry Wiley won the district attorney office. If you win, what is your vision for the office?
Well, it's a layered vision. I think that, first of all, I've been doing this for 30 years, and I think anybody that has been in a prosecutor's office for 30 years, we've seen quite a bit of change. When I started in 1990 and Kamala Harris was in my starting law clerk class, we came into a system of justice where there was still the war on crime, or war on drugs, and so the system was what I would call a very draconian system. In that, there was really a lot of mass incarcerating going on. But, when you start your career at a young age, there's not really much you can do. You just try to put one foot in front of the other. You try to learn your craft as a lawyer. Because, we're right out of law school. So you're trying to learn your craft. You're trying to learn how to be a good, effective advocate in the courtroom. And so that's where a lot of your focus is on, I'd say, probably the first 4 years of your career. You're trying cases, you're learning how to be a good trial lawyer. Then I think when you start getting into about your 5th year, that's when you're able to kind of step back and kind of take a look at the system you're in. And one of the things that you see is that there's a lot of people coming through the system that look like us. And you realize that there's something wrong with this picture, but you try to work within the system to even make changes in your own little way. One of the things that I always liked about the Alameda County District Attorney's Office is that as a prosecutor, they gave you a lot of discretion on your cases. So if somebody else made a decision to charge a case, and then the case came to me, and I saw that it was a case that probably should not have been charged, I had the full authority to dismiss that case. So that was one of the things that I really liked, because I was really able to step in and really make decisions of what I thought was a case that should be in the system versus one that I thought should not be in the system. And which, brings me to the point that, as a prosecutor, you have a lot of power. When you have the power to make a decision whether someone is going to be able to walk free or whether someone is not going to be able to walk free, That's a lot of power to have over people. And so the people that are exercising those judgments, you want them to be people that that can exercise that judgment in a fair way. Not influenced by any kind of bias, any kind of interest. You want people that can exercise those decisions in a fair manner, so that when people come through the system and they walk away from it, you want them to have a feeling that they've been treated fairly.
Okay, and you basically answered my next line of question, which is basically the decision to charge is a very powerful decision, and it's a very powerful tool. So, in a nutshell, depending on the nature of the case, depending on the magnitude of the crime, how do you reach that decision to charge a specific case?
The answer is kind of in your question. I mean, you kind of look at the magnitude of the case. You kind of look at what is it that the person is charged with doing. And one of the other part of the evaluation is, once you decide, and let me give you an example. Let's say somebody, I get a police report, somebody gets arrested, I get a report that the person broke into somebody's car. Well, then I'm going to look at the elements of that offense. The elements of a car burglary is a breaking and entering with the intent to permanently deprive the owner of that property. But there's also another element in a car burglary, is that you must also prove that the vehicle was locked. So if I walk up to a car and the car is unlocked, and I open the door and I take something out of the car, that's not an auto burglary. That's a regular theft.
Okay.
So one of the elements of an auto burglary is you got to show the car was locked. So if I see the person's arrested for an auto burglary, for example, well, then one of the things I'm going to look at in the police report is there any evidence in the police report that indicates I'm going to be able to prove that the car was locked before the person allegedly broke into it. So you kind of look at the elements of the offense to see what it is that you can prove based on what's in that police report. Then you get to the point of, okay, what is the significance of this offense? And is this something that we really want to charge? Now, if you have a vehicle where the window is broken, the side window is broken out, door open, items taken out of the car, and you can clearly prove that this is the person that broke the window, went into the vehicle, stole things out of the vehicle. Well, in terms of the decision to charge that case, you probably have a victim that's pretty upset that somebody broke into their car, stole their stuff, and then they find out that the person has been caught. Okay? So, those are all of the circumstances that we look at when we make these decisions. I'll give you another example. So somebody walks into the store, they're homeless, they're hungry, so they steal a burrito. And when they go to leave the store with the burrito, the store clerk steps in front of the door to stop them from leaving the store, and he pushes the clerk out of the way. Now, technically, that can be deemed a robbery. So whenever you take something and you use any kind of force or fear to get away with it, those are the elements of a robbery. Even though most people's visions of a robbery is somebody walking up to you, maybe pulling out a gun or something and saying, hey, give me your money. That is a robbery, but it's also a robbery if you steal something and the person catches you and then you use force to get away. That can also be deemed a robbery. Well, then that's a decision that I have to make as a charging DA. Do I really want to charge somebody with a violent felony when all they did was go in and steal a burrito? They're homeless and they're hungry, and the only force that the person used is that he pushed the clerk out of the way to leave with the burrito. It's probably not a case I'm going to charge as a robbery.
Okay, so that lead me to the second question, because it's always a two-step. It's a crime and punishment. Because what happens once you decide to charge a case,
Yeah.
at some point you don't have control of the punishment that's going to be levied on that defendant. Can you speak to that?
Well, okay. You don't have any control if the person goes to trial and they get convicted. But
Okay.
prior to the person going to trial and getting convicted, the prosecutor has a lot of control because it's all part of the plea bargaining process. So let's say we have an individual that, commits an armed robbery. I mean, they pull out a gun, they rob somebody, they get caught. Well, up until that case goes to trial, and if the person's convicted, then it's completely in our hands as to what we can offer to resolve that case short of a trial. And so, we can set the price of punishment, if you will, and as long as the judge agrees that whatever offer we make, and if they agree to accept the offer, the judge doesn't always have to accept that offer, but in many cases they do.
Okay. So basically, I've raised that up because we are at the age right now of progressive prosecutors.
Yeah.
And I strongly believe you are amongst those folks. But so tell us, how will your vision change, or how will you approach that if you become the DA of Alameda County?
Well, I think, in many cases, what people don't necessarily look at is, well, first of all, I think the average person that looks at our criminal justice system, they look at mostly what's happening to adults. If you stop the average person on the street and they look at the criminal justice system, because it is what is happening to adults that really have the biggest impacts on families, and so that's kind of what people think about. But what they don't realize, that a very, very important part of the system is really the juvenile division, because it is the juvenile division that almost acts like a feeder into the adult system. So when you hear the terms prison to school to prison pipeline, I mean, that's real. That is real. And I'll give you one example. When I took over our juvenile division in 2013, so I ran Alameda County's juvenile division from 2013 through 2017. One of the first things I did was I met with the superintendent of the Oakland Unified School District, and I made it very clear that the juvenile division would no longer be a feeder for the Oakland Unified School District. If two kids got into a fight, you call the police, and next thing you know, this kid is coming to juvenile hall. Because when I was a kid and two kids got into a fight, the schools dealt with that. And so, because that can start a school to prison pipeline. So you get into a fight with a kid and now you're in juvenile hall, really? And so I stopped that. And I let them know that those cases are no longer going to be dealt with by the juvenile division. You deal with them.
Wow, and you just brought a very significant, important point, the school to prison pipeline. So it's almost seemed like the district attorney office need to have a whole division of outreach and education.
Absolutely. And that'll be a big part of what we do. I've always said that, there really needs to be a lot more educating of the public going on, and people hear the terms school to prison pipeline, but they don't really understand what it is. They really don't understand what that means. And what it really means is that there is so much data out there that shows that if you put a kid in and you incarcerate the kid, statistically, it is much more likely that that kid is going to reoffend if you hold that kid in custody versus keeping that kid in the community, keeping that kid in their home. And, if the kid requires some additional monitoring to keep them out of trouble, that's a much better investment than incarcerating the kid, because statistically, it doesn't end well for the kids that are incarcerated. So one of the things I did when I took over our juvenile division, and this was all done in collaboration with our probation department, we were averaging about 250 kids per week in custody in the Alameda County juvenile justice system. By the time I left, we were averaging less than 100 kids in custody.
Wow. And that's all because you had the leverage and the power to make the decision.
Absolutely.
So again, so that is very important point, and that's why the whole idea of having this type of engagement, that we educate the people that it is very important that we put the people in public office that are from the community, that are favor of reform and change. So now that brings me to another point, which is diversity and inclusion within the rank. Recently, you're in charge of that office. What is your vision to diversify the office of the district attorney?
Okay, well, let me tell you that it was really groundbreaking when I got appointed the director of diversity, equity, and inclusion, because most district attorneys' offices around the country do not have offices or divisions of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so my job as the director is to, one, address issues such as implicit bias. So what I did is I put together a 4-module training so that every employee of the district attorney's office has to go through our implicit bias training. The first module gives them an understanding of the science of implicit bias and the fact that you have implicit biases. I have implicit biases. We all have implicit biases because we're shaped by cultural norms, societal norms, stereotypes. All of that influences implicit biases. Now, what are implicit biases? Implicit biases are biases that you don't hold outwardly. Like you know, I don't dislike you simply because you are wearing a gray suit, but I may have some subconscious biases against someone wearing a gray suit that I'm completely unaware of. And so what we do is we get them to understand the science that we all have these biases that are down in our subconscious that we're really unaware of, and that can impact your decision making. So that if you have some unconscious or subconscious biases against someone because they are elderly, and now a case comes across your desk and the person involved is elderly. So what we try to do with our training is to get you to understand the science, to get you to understand that we all have implicit biases and we need to understand them and work to not allow them to impact our decision making. Because as I stated earlier, you know, as prosecutors, we make decisions that can result in someone going into custody or someone being free. And if you're not aware of maybe some implicit biases that we all have, you know, it can impact your decision making. So the first module is the science. Then the second module is implicit bias, a historical perspective. So we give every employee of the DA's office a lesson in history, and we focus specifically on the policies of redlining. And these were policies that were enacted in the 1930s, and where areas of most urban centers or most urban cities in America, areas were redlined that only African Americans could live in, or only Hispanics could live in these areas that were redlined. Well, but redlined areas didn't just cover where you could live. If you owned a business in a redlined area, there were lending policies that would prevent lenders from loaning you money to improve your business. Or there were lending policies that would not allow someone to finance a home in a redlined area. And then the school system is based on the tax base So you have this system where you can't improve the property, you can't buy the property because they won't give you a loan, and then your school, the amount of money that your school will receive for funding is all based on the amount of taxes that we get from your real estate. So you see, they tied the hands of these communities in these redlined areas. And a lot of these areas are the same areas today that are the areas where there are still high crimes in these areas. If you look at the redlined areas in the city of Oakland, for example, the redlined areas in the 1930s was West Oakland and East Oakland. And those are the areas that today most of the crime still occurs. So there are policies that were enacted in the 30s that are still playing out today. And we show every person in our office that connection so that they understand that if you get a case that comes across your desk from East Oakland, well, we want you to have a little bit of empathy and understand that East Oakland isn't the way it is simply because black people live there. There's a lot of government action and a lot of private actions that contributed to these areas being these low income, high crime areas. And it's to give our employees just a better understanding of what they're working with. And so that they can also bring a little more empathy to the job and a little more understanding of the communities that we're serving.
Man, those are some great pointers. So now the training that you just mentioned, are those required training or are those optional?
No. So if you are a new employee, you have to go through all 4 modules. That's part of your orientation into the DA's office.
Okay, because sometimes when if you give people an option, they will pick and choose.
No,
but that's great. So that's right there. That's one of the reform that you already instituted without even being
we've already instituted
the top
that.
cop at the office.
Yeah.
So now I'm going to switch up. Oftentimes, the job is not so easy. When you get to the inside baseball, I know there's a lot of discussion going on and stuff. At some point, people's emotion run high. What is your advice to people that are dealing with your office as to approaching their cases when they're dealing with the district attorney office?
Well, are you talking about
as from a defense attorney point of view?
Well, I mean, I think most of our DAs, I came into an office where, individual DAs had a lot of discretion on cases. That exists still today. So one of the things that defense attorneys like about dealing with our office is that, if you're trying to resolve a case, you can resolve the case directly with the DA that you're dealing with. There are other offices that before that DA can do anything on the case, they got to go get approval from the supervisor. They got to go, do this and that. You really don't have to do that in Alameda County because we trust our DAs to make the right decision on cases. We expect them to exercise good judgment on the case. And if there's a case that they're struggling with the decision, well, then you go to a supervisor and get another opinion. But I think that the best way to approach our offices is just to be straight up about what we're dealing with in terms of the case. You may not agree the DA may not agree with you in terms of what the case is worth. There may be a disagreement there. But most of our DAs are reasonable people, and so I would just say, if you deal with them professionally, and as a defense attorney, you need to know what you're talking about. Because you may have gained some insight on the case that the DA may not be aware of because you've had an opportunity to maybe talk to more people that were present during a particular incident, and then you have to make a decision. Well, is this something that I want to reveal to the DA now? So some of that stuff is kind of strategic.
Okay. So basically it's to keep an open line of communication.
You got to keep an open line of communication, and, you got to be, and I would say this, as a defense attorney, you always want to be seen as somebody who deals forthright and honestly. Because you're gonna have to come back to that DA again, and again and again. So.
But what about on the flip side? They say, well, I don't want to talk to the DA because if the case that we don't reach on that deal, now give them enough information to prosecute my client. What do you say to that?
Well, then you probably have not a very good defense attorney if they did that. And most of the defense attorneys that I've dealt with over my career, they're not going to give you the information to prosecute their client unless they absolutely trust you.
Okay.
And they're not going to give you that information unless they think it's going to result in your being able to resolve the case. So that's not something we run into regularly.
Okay, so that's good. So that's a good point because there's always this fear of I'm trying to disclose certain information at a certain age, and but that's why it's good to have this relationship with most of the attorneys that you deal with.
Yeah.
So I want to flip to the other side, which is the relationship with the police department. So if you become the head of the Alameda County DA, you will be dealing with a whole lot of police department. Approximately how many police department in Alameda County?
17.
So you will be having a relationship to speak to cases that. So how will that work? Just in general, just give the people a brief idea of how will that relationship work.
Well, I'm currently the number 3 ranking district attorney in the Alameda County District Attorney's Office, and so we. That's what I've been doing for 30 years, is dealing with police agencies, and there's always an ongoing discussion between the DA's office and police agencies in terms of, just any number of different issues that come up, and we'll continue to do that, and we'll continue to make sure that that we always have a mutual understanding. In terms of, what conduct will be tolerated and what won't be tolerated. What kind of cases will be accepted and what kind of cases won't be accepted. That's always an ongoing discussion. But so. Okay,
well, that's good. So now it brings up to the topic of the day, which is the sentence of Derek Chauvin, and that's the country went through a whole year with just with a bull eye, everybody focused on that. So we see what happened. We saw what happened. So is that a preventive that just occurred, the sentence of Derek Chauvin? You think is that a deterrence?
Well, first let me just say that I remember when. During the time of the Rodney King case. And I remember the day that original verdict came back not guilty in Simi Valley. And I remember, this is actually an interesting story. Me and Kamala Harris we were working in the same courthouse. And I remember standing in my office, and my office looked out onto the street. And I was just really stunned at the decision, because like the George Floyd case, we saw that video over and over again, and it was just like, how could anybody watch that video and not, see the wrong in it, and I'm standing there. And as I'm standing there, I see Kamala Harris walking down the sidewalk to the garage where we parked our cars. And I could see the upset on her face. And it really described, I think, how we all felt. So when I watched the George Floyd case, I don't know about you, but as I watched it, I found myself leaning forward, like almost wanting to jump into the TV to push Derek Chauvin off of his neck. I think most people that saw that and that just showed you how difficult that was to watch. So, in answering your question, in terms of the sentence, I think the sentence does send a message to law enforcement that, that kind of thing won't be tolerated. I think that, that was a case that, most police officers that I know, and I just don't know of anyone who wasn't disgusted by what they saw. In fact, most law enforcement officers will tell you that, those are the kind of cases that make their jobs much more difficult. And I think a lot of us felt that way. And I thought the sentence was a little light. I actually thought that the judge was going to, because they found 4 aggravating factors, which made the case eligible for doubling to 15 years. And I thought at a minimum, that's what the judge was going to do. So I did think the sentence was a little light because I just thought the case itself was extremely aggravating. And, you have to understand that case was, his act was committed in front of a young girl. And I think many of the people, and I'll never forget the testimony of, I think she was the young girl that filmed it.
Video, yeah.
And you could hear the pain in her voice when she testified during that trial. And I remember saying to myself that ultimately when the jury goes in to start negotiating deliberating that case, they're going to remember that moment. That is going to be one of the moments that they talk about up in that jury room. Because I think that her description of what the case, the trauma that the case caused her, really was a description of the trauma that it caused everyone who had to watch it,
Yeah. So definitely, that is good to get your perspective on the whole case and the sentencing, and that's good. But then on the flip side, we have folks of some that will say those were the most obvious. So what about the egregious actions that are not so obvious, that are not caught on camera, and what about the charging of those decisions?
Well, okay, first of all, I think that without, talking about any specific case, I think that one of the changes that I think a lot of folks that have been career prosecutors, career prosecutors, and I'm not speaking for everybody, but I just think that there needs to be much more emphasis placed on de-escalating situations before they, wind up going to another level that, results in more aggressive actions by law enforcement. And so, I think that is a message that as the District Attorney of Alameda County, that's something that I would be stressing to all law enforcement agencies. That we would want to see a lot more emphasis placed on de-escalation of situations. Okay,
that's a good point. So, you decided to run for the office. So, do you have a campaign? And if you have a campaign, how can the voters of Alameda County reach you?
They can reach me at Terry Wiley, TerryWiley 4FORDA.com.
So repeat that again.
TerryWileyForDA.com, TerryWileyForDA.com.
So Terry Wiley, I want to thank you for coming to the civic engagement. I've known you for so long, and you have had nothing but integrity, and even the folks that are not in the DA's office, they spoke highly of you. And I'm so happy that you get to run, and look forward to supporting your campaign and with all the ideas for change and reform. I wish you good luck, brother.
All right.
And thank you.
Right on. You know, I would say this to the audience. You know, I've been a prosecutor for 30 years, and I went to both locally and nationally leading civil rights attorneys seeking their endorsement. I've been endorsed by John Burris locally, and John Burris is one of the preeminent civil rights attorneys in really California and the nation. I've been endorsed by Benjamin Crump, the attorney for the family of George Floyd, Trayvon Martin, and just
countless,
any number of cases that Ben has been on. I've also been endorsed by Lanita Baker, who is the attorney along with Ben Crump that represented the family of Breonna Taylor. And I think the reason they've all endorsed me is because of what I've stood for 30 years as a prosecutor. I have been a prosecutor of integrity. I've been a prosecutor that will do exactly what my campaign says, which is one justice for all. Everyone will be treated fairly, and no one will have an advantage over the other.
So thank you. In closing, we just had a breaking news that just happened today. Bill Cosby is out of jail. What's your take on that? I know he's out of our county, out of our state, but what is your take?
Oh, this is the first I'm hearing of it. And I mean, without knowing much about the case, I know that when I watched what was going on, I had some questions about the use of some of the prior bad acts that the judge allowed that were 20, 25 years old. You know, as a general rule, it's rare that you will see a court admit prior bad acts that are 20 and 25 years. So I don't know what the grounds were. This is the first I'm hearing of it, but it wouldn't surprise me if that contributed to the case being reversed.
Well, thank you, Terry Wiley. It's always great to talk to you, brother. And like I said, I look forward to supporting your campaign.
All right.
And wish you good luck.
All right.
Thank you.
All right.
In closing, ladies and gentlemen, once again, this is the Civic Engagement. We bring guests that make decisions that affect all of our lives, and this is the podcast that you want to listen to, and we have more guests lined up. So good night. Until then, don't let your heart be troubled, and be safe.